Howdy ho, my peeps. This has been a very difficult video to shoot. I shot part one, which you're seeing now, and it was foreshortened because I had forgotten to throw away a bunch of other videos, so I ran out of memory. Then I shot part two, which is fine. Then I ended up throwing away part one, having to try to reshoot it several times. I think this is attempt number 3 to reshoot part one. So let's see if I can get through this. Something keeps happening, you know, a nip slip, or, you know, somebody walks into the room, or my phone rings, or something. So we're on airplane mode. I got a towel just in case I get excited and things start flying around, and I don't want to, you know, get kicked off of YouTube for nudity. Anyway, so here we go. This is the story of my semi-professional music career. All right. So as a kid, I took piano lessons like a lot of people. I wasn't any good at it. I played more at the piano than I actually played with the piano, if that makes any sense. I didn't practice like I was supposed to, blah, blah, blah. Then in the 5th grade, that's the year that they send home a band instrument with anybody who wants to play in the band, in the school band. And they sent me home with a violin. And it's like they somehow expect that, you know, they send you home on a Friday, and somehow when you come home back to school on Monday, you're supposed to know how to play this thing. I mean, I had no idea. So I messed around with that for a little bit and just, you know, didn't take any private lessons, turned it back in, I was done. I didn't really play much music, well, any music actually, until I was 38 years old. And I was dating this guy named Doug, and Doug loved the blues. I hadn't really paid that much attention to blues music until he and I started dating. So we'd go see live blues in the area, and he would listen to blues on the, you know, CDs and blah, blah. So one afternoon we're sitting around, and he says, wow, he says, you know, I'd really like to learn to play the harmonica. Well, me being me, 3 days later, we were in a class given by our local adult education program. So anyhow, we do this class. I think it was a 6-week class. By the time we were done, I was playing harmonica, and I was really enjoying it. Doug never took to it, but I was really having a good time. There was a girl in the class who I got to be friends with, who was also enjoying playing harmonica. She also wasn't very good. I was the star pupil. Of course, I'm always the star pupil. I'm one of those nerdy star pupil kind of people. So anyway, by the end of the class, I was really enjoying playing the rhythm section of harmonica, and not so much playing leads. I could play leads, but I really like doing rhythms. So I asked the teacher if he knew anyone who taught bass or drums. Well, turns out he knew both, but he suggested that I call this guy who was a bass teacher, bass player in the area. I'd never met the guy before, and pursue bass. So I did. I called him, and we set up a time. Well, in the interim, Doug and I had gone out to see some different bands, and one of the bands that we saw was called Ron Thompson and the Resistors. Now, Ron Thompson was a very, very well-known musician. He has since passed away, but he did a lot of session work in Los Angeles, a lot of work with Fleetwood Mac. He toured with Fleetwood Mac, so he was a honest-to-God pro musician. And he had a drummer playing with him named Chris Millar, who I ended up taking some lessons with later, and then a bass player whose name was Jeff Henry. Well, Jeff Henry was, and still is, because he's still with us, thank God, 6'4", 400 pounds, just an imposing figure, right? Nicest man you'd ever want to meet. So anyhow, I go to my first lesson, the door opens, and here it's Jeff Henry. I had no idea that Jeff Henry was going to be my actual teacher. That was kind of a trip. So anyway, I said, oh my God, I just saw you guys. You were wonderful, blah, blah, blah. So I took bass lessons from him for about a year. And until he moved to Los Angeles to do music full-time, to play in bands and do session work full-time. So, oh, and incidentally, we got to be excellent friends. And his wife, Susan, is the person who taught me how to make jambalaya correctly. And when I say correctly, she was born and raised in Franklin Parish, Louisiana, which is above New Orleans. I don't think New Orleans is in Franklin Parish, but she was born and raised right near New Orleans. And she taught me her family's recipe for making jambalaya. And you don't just throw a bunch of stuff in a pot. I mean, the things all have to be cooked separately, and then they're combined, and they have to rest for a while, and all sorts of interesting procedures for making this jambalaya. So I was quite honored that she taught me how to do this. So anyhow, so he taught me bass. They were good friends of mine. They moved. Then I had a goal, and I was working towards this goal ever since I started my bass lessons, and that was that by my 40th birthday, I wanted to actually play in front of people. And so that's what I was working toward. Well, as it turned out, on my 40th birthday, I went out with this this man, Doug, who I was still dating at the time, and I played in front of people for the first time. And it ended up being at a jam session that Ron Thompson was hosting in this tiny little dive sports bar out in the middle of nowhere, out in the middle of an orange grove somewhere. And the whole place was full of local musicians, so it was a little bit scary. But I put my name on the list. Well, it was a lot scary. Put my name on the list, got called up, played a song or two, worked out fine, and I was hooked. I'll never forget the first time I got applause from an audience, and it was applause for me personally because Ron said, because I had told him, I said, this is my first time playing, are you sure you want me on the list? He says, yeah, no problem, whatever. So after I was done and it was time for somebody else to get up, he made some kind of little announcement like, yeah, let's give Cheryl a round of applause. This is her first time she's ever played in front of people. And of course I got this thundering round of applause. And I was hooked. I was hooked. I will do just about anything for applause now. I just love it. So, I continued to go to jam sessions. Well, the other woman who was in our class, who I mentioned earlier, who also liked to play harmonica and didn't do it very well, she and I would hang out. We'd go different places. Well, one night she says, hey, listen, I need to go over here to this bar because I'm meeting up with a friend of mine and his band is looking for a bass player. Maybe you want to go. So I did. I met him. His name's Pat. He invited me to a rehearsal. I showed up at the rehearsal and I ended up being their bass player. Well, my friend Mike, who lives here with me, was the lead guitar player and the lead singer. That's how I met Mike, was through Pat. So anyhow, I started rehearsing with that band. I also very quickly started rehearsing with some other bands as well, primarily doing fill-in work, like my friend Beverly, who I went to lunch with a couple weeks ago, and I did that video about. Beverly Green is her name. She's a drummer and a singer, and she and I met through all of these connections, and they needed a fill-in bassist when they went out of town or were playing super late because their bass player couldn't do that. So I ended up sitting in with her band a lot. Then it kind of snowballed from there. I started, when you get involved in a rather large local music scene, you meet people from every genre of music, all ages, and you end up, or can end up, just playing every night with somebody new. A lot of times you just play one time. And I did a lot of that. And I played, there were nights I was playing in abandoned warehouses with 16-year-olds, headbanging metal music. 2 nights later, I'd be rehearsing with a blues band, and then on the weekend, I'd be playing a gig with my country band. So I did a lot of playing back then, and enjoyed every bit of it. There are some experiences that stood out. in part 2, I'm going to tell you about some of the gigs that stood out. But in part 1, I went over some of the jam sessions that were really exciting to me. So I'm going to tell you about those again. Probably the most exciting jam session I ever went to, it was a professional musicians jam being held in a little town called Ladera, which is right near Los Angeles. Very kind of mean streets of LA kind of place, run down and a little scary, especially at 2 o'clock in the morning. But I had been invited because I had met this guy online who worked for the company that made my bass back in the day. Now that company, which was called Michael Tobias Tobias Designs, he had sold that brand name to a Korean company, and they were now making basses with under that label. And I think Michael Tobias was still making basses at the time, but he was doing just custom work. So I ended up with this bass that I still play and absolutely adore. And somehow I met this guy it must have been a forum or a bulletin board, something, and he and I were talking about my bass, and he was telling me, interesting stuff about the company, about working for Michael Tobias. Anyhow, I told him that, we go to LA a lot, my friend Beverly and I, and, is he out gigging? I'd like to come by and support him. Well, he said, listen, there's this pro musicians jam. If you and your friend want to show up, I'll put your name on the list. So he did, we did, and it was amazing. It was held in this little club, called Club Ladera, which is no longer there, or at least I thought it was little. It was in the strip center, right? And you go through these doors like you're going to a small little storefront. Well, you go in, and the whole damn strip center is full of this bar. It went for storefronts and storefronts down the way. It had 3 bars with 3 different stages. It had an outdoor patio area. Place was huge. I'm pretty sure that there was only one other white person in the bar, and it was one of the bartenders. It was one of those places where there were all sorts of musicians there who were current musicians. There was some rap people there, and I can't remember who they were, but they were current rap people at the time. Then all sorts of other local session musicians, their girlfriends, their families, and this jam session that was going on. Well, the only people I remember who were famous, who were there with us right then, were a couple of members of the Commodores. I don't know if you guys remember that band, the Commodores. They were back from the 70s. Anyway, they were there, and I was awestruck, starstruck. I mean, it was really exciting. So we went ahead and put our names on the list to play, and we finally get called up, and we got a lot of strange looks. First of all, we were girls. You just didn't see middle-aged. My friend was 45 and I was 40. You just didn't see that. You just didn't see that at jam sessions. Particularly jam sessions where you had serious musicians. So you better know your stuff if you're going to get up there and play. So we figured, well, what can they do? They can laugh at us and kick us out. That's about the worst that could happen. So we did get called up, and I think we played 3 or 4 songs, and we got all kinds of applause, and people came, after we went down, people came up, and this one guy came up, I'll never forget this, another big, tall drink of water, big guy, and he looks down at me, and he says, I want to shake your hand. So I'm shaking his hand, and he says, I just want to tell you, I have been coming to this jam for, I guess, months or years, something. He said, I've wanted to play every night, but I've been too scared. He said, seeing you and your friend get up there and just play your hearts out and do a great job and not be scared, he said, that's, that was really inspirational. You want to dance. So we danced out the rest of the night. My friend and I danced out the rest of the night. I danced a couple dances with this guy. He introduced me to somebody else. We just danced and had a wonderful time. Just wonderful. Closed the place down. It was after 2 o'clock when we left. And that was pretty amazing. That was that was exciting. I really felt like I belonged for the first time. I mean, truly belonged in that world, probably for the first time. So that was a real exciting jam. You know, I couldn't count up all the people that I've played with and all the places that I've played. I was playing at least twice a week. Sometimes every night I would go out and play with somebody. And it was really actual paid performances, well, 3 that really stand out from that era of my life. One was that we had been invited to play at a tribute to Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys, to Bob Wills' brother, who was the singer in this band. Tommy Duncan was his name. And they would do this tribute. It was a local musicians thing, because a lot of people in our area, it turns out, had played for Bob Wills. In fact, my youngest kid's piano teacher's ex-husband had played bass for Bob Wills for years. So that was kind of interesting. So anyhow, and if you don't know who Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys were, they were a very, very, very well-known kind of country swing band. Anyhow, and they played a lot of like dance halls and that sort of stuff way, way back in the day, back in the, I guess, 40s and 50s and into the 60s, but definitely 40s and 50s. So anyhow, we'd been invited to play in this tribute. So, and there were about 5 bands that were playing. So we get there, we got our stuff set up. There were a couple bands before us. The band right before us was a bluegrass band, and they were mediocre. Nice people, but in terms of their playing ability, they were mediocre. And they weren't playing music that people wanted to dance to. So when it was our turn, the guy the promoter of the show, comes up to him and he says, "Hey, listen," he says, "I'm going to bump you guys down on the schedule because we got to get these people up on their feet. They're getting restless. So our band's going to go ahead and play right now, right? So you guys wait." Well, Pat, who was a great talker, still is, he said, no, he says, please, just let us get up there. Give us 3 songs. If we don't have everybody up and dancing after 3 songs, he says, just give me the signal and we'll go down. So he hemmed and hawed, this man, and he says, okay, fine, but if you don't get him dancing, you got to go. Okay, no problem. So we get up there, we start our set, and I was a little nervous anyway, because we were kind of under the gun, and this was a type of music that the people who go to listen to cowboy and country swing are usually aficionados. So if you're not on it, they know, and it can be embarrassing. So anyhow, we get up and we start our set, and I got my eyes down. I'm not looking at the audience. I'm nervous, so I'm just playing my thing, and I'm just kind of looking back and forth at my bandmates and doing our deal. I guess it was probably the beginning of the 3rd or maybe the 4th song, and I happened to look up and looked at the audience, and we had the whole place on their feet. Everybody was dancing. It was really exciting. So we finished out our set. It was about maybe a 30-minute set or so. And when we were done, we get this big round of applause, and the promoter of the show comes up on stage and he takes the mic and he says something like, I just want to let all you guys know that's some of the finest swing music we've had live around here, and it's so nice to see that the young people are keeping the tradition alive. I mean, we were already in our 40s and 50s, so that tells you how old the audience was. But all those people could boogie. Anyhow, so that was really exciting to get that kind of recognition and to be appreciated and to be able to get people up on their feet. That was exciting. So that was wonderful. Then another paid gig that I did that was real exciting was it was a kind of impromptu thing. I get a phone call from one of my musicians friends, he says, hey, he says, I've got a gig. It pays real well, but I need a bass player. You want to do it? I said, sure, what kind of music? He says, well, it's everything. I'll email you a list. So that was all kinds of stuff. Rock from the 70s. I mean, even like that... it was really popular in the 1980s, that kind of electronic music. I mean, everything. So we were playing a lot of like top 40 pop kind of stuff, which I hadn't had a lot of experience with. So got the set list, went on YouTube, found the music, learned it in whatever key I was supposed to learn it in, and showed up at this bar that is actually 3 miles down the road from me. This is long before I moved up here too. I was still living in town. So we show up at this bar and just kind of by the seat of our pants, we just started playing. I don't think we'd had any rehearsal, or maybe we'd rehearsed once. So we had to pull together this paid gig where we're waiting for our money at the end. None of it, I think some of us had played together, but we'd never all played at the same time. Few of us were new. I mean, we'd never played with any of these people. So it was interesting, but the gig went off really well. We had a great time playing, and the venue owner actually paid us. I mean, sometimes you have to run them down. They don't want to pay you at the end of the night. And plus we got a bunch of tips, so that was really neat. That was an exciting one because it was very off the cuff, it wasn't rehearsed. So those were two really exciting gigs. Another gig that we played that was real exciting was another invitation, and it was a battle of the bands for blues music that was being held at this kind of like a speakeasy roadhouse sort of thing over on the other side of town. Again, not too many white faces in this crowd. And it was a bar, but it was set up in somebody's house. So it was completely illegal. This place had been running for decades and decades. And the woman who owned this house and this bar, speakeasy, kind of, you got to be in the know to even know it's there kind of place, she was this ancient old woman who would sit at the door with her cash box. And she would, take the door money, and she was always watching around, looking, making sure everybody's drinking and paying for their drinks and stuff. She was hilarious. So anyhow, we get invited to this thing, and there were, I believe, again, it was about 5 bands that were playing. We won. We actually won. And that was with 2 people, white people playing in this band. And nobody else was white. I mean, it was all like just dyed-in-the-wool, steeped in the tradition blues players who were the sons and daughters of blues players who were the sons and daughters of blues players. These people came from Mississippi to, the African-American side of our town, and they never left. I mean, it was very, very, very culturally insulated, this experience. And it was so cool because there didn't seem, even though there were a few white people in our band, you didn't feel as if you were, I didn't feel as if I were being singled out or looked at askance or, racially profiled or anything like that. In fact, I didn't even really feel female. And that is an interesting thing about being a musician. I mean, a real musician, no. Everyone who plays music is real. I mean a gigging musician. If you are out there playing music in your area for money, the line really blurs the line of race and gender. Now, I'm sure in the professional music world it's probably different. But in the semi-pro world, everyone works so hard just to get out and find a place to play, just to find some other people to play with, just to get a little bit of money to do this, to do their thing. It is so hard. And so this camaraderie occurs. And after you've been doing it for a year or two, you look around at this group of 100 people that you play with all the time and and you see at parties, and they're everything from 13-year-olds to 80-year-olds, every color, both genders, and probably more than just one gender, now that I think back on it. And none of that matters, is what I'm trying to say. Or at least for me, in my area, when I was playing music semi-professionally, that was true. So I can't really speak to any other area or anybody else's experience. That was my experience. So, what happened, the reason I'm no longer doing it, is that I decided to move out of town and up here, which is a good 30-mile drive back into town to play with anybody or whatever. I kept it up for a while. I stayed working with these different bands, but it was really, really tough. And also my focus had kind of changed. I sold my house in town and I bought this place, which required a ton of work. So I was finding I was spending all my off hours building fences, clearing things, painting. I mean, it was just all the stuff that had to be done. And so my focus fell away from playing music all the time. I continued to do it off and on. In fact, I continue to do it off and on. But it's very sporadic and very rare, and I don't go out and do paid gigs. It's usually just sitting in somebody's living room. Hey, we're going to jam tonight. You feel like coming over, or that kind of thing. And so I'll go and I'll hang out and I'll play. So that is the story of my semi-professional music career, and the thing that shook out of it, that was the most beneficial for me, is I learned how to be in a crowd and not feel anxious. Because, when you're walking around in a crowd of people, in different areas that you've never been in before, not quite sure what the lay of the land is, but you've got a guitar over your shoulder and a bass amp in your other hand, you fit in. I mean, you have a place. There's no question about why you're there. I'm with the band. And somehow being with the band gave me a safe pod to move around in through all of these different experiences. And that wore off on the rest of my life. So I found that, I can kind of deal with crowds now more or less comfortably. So it was a huge learning experience. Had some of the highest highs of my life occurred during that time, and it left me with some lasting therapy that blah blah blah. I could go on and yammer. Obviously, this is a subject very dear to my heart, so I'm going to stop now. I hope I was able to find some photographs to insert. If I didn't, forgive me. I just wasn't able to find my photograph album. So, can you see anything? No. So, I will say bye-bye, and I'll come back to you guys again later. Bye!